Hi mamas, it's Mary here. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my sourdough bread recipe. You're going to need your kitchen scale, a big bowl, your sourdough starter, bread flour, salt, and water. I'm going to start by measuring out 100 grams of active sourdough starter. If you're not sure what an active sourdough starter looks like, I do have a tutorial for how to feed your sourdough starter on my channel that I will link in the description below. If you add too much sourdough starter, go ahead and just pull a little bit out until you have about 100 grams. Then you're going to tare your scale so that it's zeroed and add 350 grams of water. I realized later that I only added 325 grams of water, but I went back later and added another 25 grams to make sure that my dough was the consistency that I wanted it. Then you're going to tare your scale again and add 10 grams of salt. Stir that together until it's combined. It's going to be kind of like a milky consistency, but there might be a few chunks left. Once that's done, go ahead and add 500 grams of your bread flour. You really want a high gluten flour because the gluten is going to make a stronger dough, which is going to help it rise and bake better later. If you add too much flour, just go ahead and just scoop it out until you have about 500 grams. Then you can remove your kitchen scale and go ahead and mix it up. This is where I realized that my bread dough was a little bit dry, and I realized that I'd only added 350 grams of water. So I went ahead and got my scale back out and added another 25 grams of water to bring the consistency of the dough to where I wanted it. Once I liked the consistency, I covered my bowl and let it rest for 30 minutes before I did the first stretch and folds. Here it is 30 minutes later, and I'm going to do the first stretch and folds, just pulling the bread and stretching it over itself. It's still pretty sticky at this point, but you'll see as I go on that the dough gains elasticity throughout the stretch and fold process. Then cover it up, and 30 minutes later, come back and do the same thing. When you stretch and fold, you're just going to be pulling the dough up, folding it over on itself, and rotating the bowl, maybe doing this 8 to 10 times until the dough comes together into a little ball. As you can see, the consistency is already starting to get more elastic and stretchy, and this is the third stretch and fold right here. I really love watching the dough come together from a rough dough ball into a beautiful little round stretchy piece of dough like this. You can really see the difference from a rough scraggly mess to a beautiful dough ball. We're going to go ahead and cover this up and let it rest for 8 to 12 hours. Here's the dough about 8 hours later, and I am doing the touch test just to see that it's springing back enough and that it's ready to be put in the fridge overnight for its proof. I took out my Banneton baskets and I'm dusting them with flour. I like to use this little tea sieve to evenly dust the baskets with the flour. I just put the remainder of the flour on the counter in case the dough is a little sticky coming out of the bowl. I like to use a spatula to detach the dough from the sides of the bowl, but as you can see, it came out pretty cleanly. Just a few little pieces left in the bowl. This dough I'm going to use to make 2 smaller loaves, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it in half, and we're going to form each dough ball into its own loaf. I like to use this method where I stretch the dough into a bit of a rectangle and fold it into thirds, and then I roll it up on itself and build tension that way on the crust of the dough. I scoop the dough towards me by pushing my hands underneath it and letting the stickiness of the dough kind of catch the dough on the counter and build tension on the top of the surface of the dough. So just doing this a few times, you can see that there are bubbles rising to the top and the dough is looking shiny and glossy, and there's a lot of tension building there on the top of the dough. Once I have it in a nice ball and I can tell that there's plenty of tension, I'll go ahead and pop it upside down into my banneton and just stitch the top together. There's actually so much tension on this loaf that I was barely able to stitch the crease together. But that was fine. I went ahead and set it aside and get started on my next loaf. I'm going to use the same technique here, just stretching the dough into a rectangle, being very gentle with the dough to not tear or break it in any way. And then I'm going to roll it up on itself and use the same pulling technique that I used before to tuck the edges under and build that tension on the surface. Once both these dough balls are ready, I'm going to cover them up with the plastic shower caps I like to use, and these are going to go into the fridge overnight to proof. The dough actually ended up proofing a little bit longer than I intended it to. This is about noon of the next day. I just had a busy morning and wasn't able to get to it before then. But the dough can really last in the fridge for a few days, so it doesn't matter how long you let it proof in there, so long as you bake it within a few days to maybe a week. I turned the dough out onto a piece of parchment paper and dusted off the top of the extra flour, and then I'm scoring it with my bread lamb to get some nice scoring along the top so that when it bakes, it rises through the cut that I've made. I then spray it with water, and that's going to also help it rise through the top and through the creases that I've made. I went ahead and turned out my second loaf, dusted it of the extra flour, and scored it with the bread lamb. After spraying it with water, I went ahead and put both loaves in the oven, and I'm going to bake them for just 7 minutes, and then I'm going to take them out for the 7-minute score. This technique just reopens the crust, allowing the dough to rise a little bit more before it seals over for its hard bake. This is the finished loaf. You can see it rose a little bit more on the second score that I did. These aren't my prettiest loaves. I do think this next batch of loaves I'm about to put in the oven turned out looking a lot prettier. I know a lot of people bake their bread in a Dutch oven, but I've liked it doing it this way on a pan because I can fit more loaves and bake more at once instead of baking them one at a time in a Dutch oven. The Dutch oven is helpful for keeping the humidity in the oven. I've had no problem though using the method where I just spray the loaves with water before I put them in the oven. That gives them the moisture that they need to rise. Here's one of the finished loaves. It's got a beautiful crust on it, and the inside looks beautiful as well. If you liked this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for more baking videos.